I'd never planned on flipping pancakes and pouring stale coffee under the hum of flickering neon at 3 in the morning. But when you burn enough bridges, even a place like the IHOP off I-73 starts to feel like salvation. The graveyard shift was all mine, 3 weeks deep now, clinging to this greasy highway diner, like I might outrun what waited back home. The sign out front buzzed so loud I sometimes heard it in my dreams. IHOP, in sputtering blue letters, a beacon for truckers, drunks, and the occasional lost soul who thought they could sober up over a short stack. Inside, the smell of fryer oil and burnt syrup sank into my hair, no matter how many showers I took, when I dragged myself back to the cheap motel down the road. They called it the graveyard shift for a reason, I guess. Nothing alive should be moving around at this hour. Except me and Mr. Granger. Mr. Granger was here when I arrived, and he'd be here long after I crawled off into whatever ditch waited for me next. His skin looked like old wax left too close to a space heater, thin and yellow under the ceiling lights that never stopped buzzing. He smoked constantly, even though there were no smoking signs taped all over the cracked windows. I never once saw him flick his ash anywhere but the floor. That first night, he trained me how to work the register, how to refill the battered coffee pot that sputtered and steamed but never really got hot enough. He didn't say much until I asked how long he'd been here. He just squinted at me through the smoke curling off his cigarette and asked if I believed in rules. I thought he meant the employee handbook, the one with laminated pages stuck together with syrup fingerprints. Instead, he reached into his apron pocket and pulled out this sheet of paper. Looked older than the diner. Grease stains in the corners, the edges burnt like someone tried to torch it and changed their mind halfway through. He held it out like a priest offering communion. I took it, unfolded it, careful so it wouldn't tear. 7 rules. No title, no explanation. Just crooked black letters scratched like a kid's handwriting. 1. Do not acknowledge the hungry man. 2. Never clean table 6 after midnight. 3. Knock twice before entering the walk-in freezer. 4. If the lights flicker, hold your breath. 5. Do not flip pancakes after 3 a.m. 6. If you hear a bell, answer the order politely. 7. When the bacon screams, you must run. I laughed, couldn't help it. It sounded like some cheap horror story you'd read online at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep. Just another creepypasta about haunted diners and ghost truckers drifting down I-73. Mr. Granger didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stuck the cigarette between his teeth and said, "Break a rule, and you'll wish the health inspector shut us down decades ago." I stared at the paper while the hum of the neon sign bled through the greasy windows. The smell of fryer oil curled into my nose, heavy and sweet and sickly all at once. I read them again, word by word. Rules. I'd broken plenty of those before. I figured these couldn't be any worse. I tucked the paper back into his apron when he motioned for it. He patted that pocket like it held his last pack of smokes or a lucky coin. Maybe it did. "Shift starts at midnight sharp," he rasped. "Pray you remember every word." I didn't pray. Not yet. But that was my first mistake. Most nights, the highway out front looked like a black river that swallowed headlights before they ever made it to the diner's cracked parking lot. If someone did stumble in, they were usually too drunk to care, whether the eggs were rubber or the coffee tasted like burnt paper. I liked it that way. Quiet, predictable. Between wiping down booths and scraping dried pancake batter off the griddle, my mind drifted back home whether I wanted it to or not. I tried not to think about what I'd done, how fast I'd packed my life into 2 garbage bags and fled a state line I'd never planned to cross. Sometimes I saw her face reflected in the window when I was wiping ketchup crust off the laminated menus. Her face, wide eyes, mouth open in surprise that turned into something else when the tires skidded. I shook it off like steam from the coffee pot, but it always came back. IHOP didn't care about my past. Mr. Granger didn't either. He didn't ask what I'd done to land here working graveyard shifts for drunk truckers and wide-eyed kids who forgot to go home after prom. He just cared that I learned the rules. On slow nights, I watched him from the counter. He always claimed the same booth in the corner. The vinyl seat ripped open like a split lip, stuffing poking out in gray tufts. Sometimes I caught him mumbling under his breath at nothing. Other times, he'd lift that battered rule sheet out of his apron, unfold it, smooth it flat on the table like a priest setting out a prayer book. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I watched him lean over the rule sheet, cigarette smoke curling around his head. His lips moved like he was counting the rules, tapping each one with a yellowed finger. I swear I heard him say a name, real soft, like it hurt to say it. Tommy, maybe, or Tammy, before he caught me staring. He flicked his ash on the floor and barked, "Ketchup bottles, kid. They're always sticky. Don't matter how many times you scrub." So I scrubbed. I scrubbed until my knuckles stung, and my reflection in the metal napkin dispenser looked just as hollow as I felt. Sometimes I'd hear something behind me when I was crouched under the counter refilling the sugar caddies, a soft scrape like fingernails on tile. Once, I thought I saw the freezer door shift open an inch on its own. I blamed the broken hinge and turned back to my work. When the clock crept past midnight, the front door stayed locked. Nobody sane rolled in after 12. Except for the ones who did. The ones who looked half there, who smelled like old rain and rotten leather. Mr. Granger handled those. He always handled them. I told myself I didn't believe in diner ghost stories. I told myself the only monsters out here were drunk drivers and old regrets. But that paper burned a hole in my mind every time I glanced at Granger's pocket. 7 rules. 7 thin lines between me and something I didn't want to see. That night, the quiet settled so deep it buzzed in my teeth. I wiped syrup rings off table 4, then table 5. My reflection in the window showed my hair pulled back, eyes sunken from nights spent wide awake in the motel room where the walls were thin and the TV only played static after 2 a.m. I didn't even notice when I drifted to table 6. The rag in my hand smeared a sticky ring of maple syrup into a clean circle. A drop clung to my finger. I wiped it off on my apron without thinking. The smell in the air changed. Like flowers left too long in a vase, turning sweet and sour all at once. That's when I felt the booth cushion dip. When I looked up, she was sitting there. Blue Sunday coat, hair pinned neat like someone's grandmother who'd just come from church. Skin slack, folded in waxy layers under the diner lights that made her eyes look wet and empty. She didn't move her mouth, but I heard her anyway. A voice inside my head, cold and soft as mold growing in the dark. "Sit, dear, just for a moment." My knees locked. The rag dropped from my hand and landed with a wet slap. Her hand, cold and dry as freezer burn, wrapped around my wrist. Her fingers squeezed. I smelled rotting flowers and burnt coffee. In that frozen second, all I wanted to do was sit across from her, fold my hands like a good granddaughter, and listen to whatever she had to say. But then, Mr. Granger's voice cracked through the hum in my head, sharp enough to snap bone. "Don't look at her. Back away, now." His hand, strong in a way I hadn't expected, clamped my elbow and yanked me backwards so hard my teeth clacked together. I stumbled behind the counter, syrup on my sleeve, heartbeat punching against my ribs. When I dared peek over the edge, the old woman was gone, only a faint smell of flowers and stale air where she'd been. Granger's breath rattled like an old car engine about to die. He spat on the floor between my shoes. "You cleaned the damn table, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. He shook his head, eyes dark and small. "1 down, 6 to go." I didn't know what he meant, but I didn't ask. The silence after she vanished felt worse than her cold hand on my skin. I could still feel the ghost of her grip, dry and papery, like she'd pressed frost right into my bones. Behind the counter, I kept my head down while Mr. Granger leaned against the soda machine, watching me like he was deciding whether to fire me or bury me out back with the fryer grease. I wanted to say something, an apology, maybe, or a question, but my mouth stayed dry and useless. The overhead lights buzzed. A fly crawled along the ketchup pump, its wings shivering in the stale air. Granger finally moved. He flicked open the battered Zippo lighter he always kept in his breast pocket, the one with the IHOP logo scratched half off the metal. He sparked it once, twice, the flame catching on the 3rd try. He didn't light a new cigarette this time. He just watched the flame dance like he wanted to stick his fingers in it. "You think it's funny?" He rasped without looking at me. "The paper. The rules." I swallowed, but the back of my throat stuck together. "I didn't mean to. Mean to don't matter. You cleaned the table." She came. She always comes when you clean it. He snapped the lighter shut, the sound sharp enough to make me flinch. He stepped closer, so close I could smell the stale smoke soaked into his coat. "You know who she was?" he asked. I shook my head. He jabbed a finger at the empty booth. Table 6, neat as a grave now, the syrup wiped clean like I'd never touched it. Francine Moore. Used to sit right there every Friday night, turkey club, pot of coffee, tip just enough to not feel cheap. One night, someone spilled a milkshake, busboy wiped it up. She didn't like that. His voice cracked on the last word. He coughed, deep and rattling, like his lungs were lined with fryer grease too. "What did she want from me?" I asked. The words came out small, like I was a kid again, sitting at my mother's kitchen table, waiting to be told I'd messed up one more time. Granger's eyes drifted to the ceiling. He ran a hand through what was left of his hair, thin strands stuck to his forehead with sweat. "She wants what they all want. Company. A crack to crawl through. You break a rule, you open a door. That's what this place is. A door that never stays shut for long." He pulled the rule sheet from his apron pocket and unfolded it between us. The paper looked worse in the bright diner lights, oil spots and old burns turning the edges soft as old cloth. He tapped the second rule with a nicotine-stained fingernail. "You see it now? Never clean table 6 after midnight. Simple. Easy. Yet folks can't help themselves." I stared at the crooked letters. The line of my thumb still smelled faintly of syrup and old flowers. "What happens now?" I asked. He laughed, dry and humorless, the sound scraping up from deep in his chest. "Now? Now you pray the rest hold. One broken means she's sniffing around. The rest, well, they'll come knocking too if you're not careful." He folded the paper up again and slid it back into his pocket like a priest sliding a Bible into a drawer no one opens anymore. "Why don't you just leave?" I asked, before I could stop myself. The question floated there between us, stupid and obvious. He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Some of us can't leave. Some of us are part of the wallpaper now. This place eats what folks leave behind, their regrets, their lies, their debts, and it keeps the rest warm on the griddle." He stepped back, running a hand over the countertop like he was petting an old dog. His fingers trembled just a little. "You hungry?" he asked suddenly, voice softer. I didn't answer. Didn't trust my voice not to crack. He took it as a no and wandered back to his booth. I watched him slide into the ripped vinyl seat, lean back, eyes half shut like he could sleep with ghosts whispering all around him. Maybe he could. Maybe that's why he was still here, the last thing keeping this place from spilling its rot all over the empty highway. I stayed behind the counter the rest of the night, arms hugged tight around my chest, eyes locked on table 6. The smell of rotting flowers didn't fade. It clung to my apron and the rag I'd dropped on the floor, a reminder that I'd opened a door I couldn't shut again. And somewhere deep in the building, maybe the freezer, maybe the shadows in the vents, something new waited for me to slip up again. 1 rule down. 6 to go. I didn't laugh at the list after that. The next night, I thought about quitting. I sat in the break room staring at the smudged time clock, my finger hovering over the plastic punch card. I could have left. I could have grabbed my bag from the sticky locker and just walked right back down that empty highway until the sunrise caught me somewhere that smelled less like fryer grease and old ghosts. But I didn't. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go. Maybe because part of me believed Mr. Granger when he said some doors didn't stay shut. Maybe I was scared of what might follow me if I didn't clock back in. So at 11:55, I was behind the counter like always, tying my apron over my thrift store jeans, brushing lint off my sleeves while the neon sign buzzed behind the fogged-up windows. The only other sound was the soft clatter of Granger's lighter. He sat at his booth, rule sheet folded in his pocket, like it was the only thing keeping his bones from giving up. I kept my head down, wiped down the same clean spot on the countertop until the laminate started peeling under my rag. The ketchup bottles were sticky again, they always were. I didn't dare look at table 6. By the time midnight rolled over, the only people left were ghosts and me. The hum of the fryer filled the silence, a low oily hiss that soaked into my ears until I almost didn't notice when the lights above the griddle flickered. Once. Then again, a slow stutter that made the shadows jump along the grease-slick tiles. I froze, rag halfway to the floor. I remembered the rule, number 4, if the lights flicker, hold your breath. My chest locked up. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my lips together so tight my teeth ached. My lungs flared hot, begging for air. The flicker got faster, a strobe light in my skull. I felt it before I saw it, cold breath crawling across my shoulders like winter wind through a broken window. Something brushed the hair off my neck, gentle, slow, like fingers made of ice. My heartbeat slammed so hard I thought it might knock the air right out of me. I didn't open my eyes, but I knew her name. I didn't know how I knew it, but it rolled through my head like an echo in a frozen tunnel. Clara. Clara wants to breathe. Clara wants in. Beside me, I felt a hand clamp onto my shoulder. Granger. I could hear his breath rattling behind his teeth, held tight just like mine. His fingers dug into my apron strap, steadying me while the lights danced overhead like a dying star. I counted heartbeats instead of seconds. 1, 2, 10. My lungs burned like I'd swallowed acid. Still, I didn't open my mouth. I pictured that rule sheet folded neat in Granger's pocket. One line keeping Clara on the other side of my teeth. Then, all at once, the flickering stopped. The fryer hissed normal again. The hum of the neon signs settled back into its lazy drone. When I opened my eyes, frost bloomed along the fryer door. Tiny handprints smeared across the steel like something had pressed against it from the inside. My breath shot out in a hot, shaking gasp. Granger didn't move his hand right away. His knuckles were white against my shoulder, the old scars along his wrist standing out in the harsh diner light. When he finally let go, I could feel the blood rush back under my skin. "You did good, kid," he said, voice scraping out around the edges like he hadn't used it in years. "Don't ever breathe when she wants it. You do, she crawls right in, and you won't be you anymore." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know what Clara would do once she was inside. I just wiped the condensation off my arms and stared at the handprints melting on the fryer door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his lighter again. He flicked it open, flame sputtering once before catching steady. He held it between us, the warmth just enough to cut the chill still stuck in my chest. "Better than the last one," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He didn't say what happened to the last one. He never did. I didn't sleep the day after Clara brushed my neck with fingers made of ice. I lay on the motel mattress, staring at the popcorn ceiling, while the wall heater rattled like an old truck engine. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw frost blooming on the fryer door, tiny handprints melting into my skin. When the clock crawled toward 11, I got up, splashed cold water on my face in the cracked bathroom mirror, and told myself I'd quit tomorrow. Just one more shift. Just one more night behind that counter, pretending the rules were only words on a burned scrap of paper. The diner looked the same as always when I pushed through the door. Same cracked tiles, same stale fryer air that clung to my hair before I even tied on my apron. Granger was already in his booth. He didn't look at me when I clocked in, just tapped the side of his nose with 2 fingers and flicked his lighter open and shut like a nervous tick. Midnight passed. A single drunk stumbled in and left a trail of cold French fry grease and cigarette ash from the door to the bathroom and back out again. I wiped down the counter, careful to keep my eyes far from table 6. When the fryer hissed, I flinched. But the light stayed steady this time. No flicker, no Clara. Then the freezer door creaked. Not much. Just enough for the hinges to sigh under the flickering fluorescent hum. Granger's voice came from behind me, soft but sharp enough to slice through my heartbeat. "Bacon stock's low. Go check the walk-in." I turned. He didn't look at me, just stared out the window at the black highway like he might see something crawling down the center line. My feet moved before my brain caught up. Past the fryers, through the swinging door to the back prep area where the floor stayed slick no matter how many times I mopped it. The freezer door waited at the end of the hall, her metal latch crusted in frost, a low hum leaking through the seam like a giant sleeping behind steel. I remembered the rule. Number 3, knock twice before entering the walk-in freezer. I raised my knuckles, skin prickling and the cold air leaking out around the hinges. 1 knock. 2. The sound echoed like bones tapping hollow wood. The latch popped on its own. The door swung inward slow, the hinges groaning like they hated being awake at this hour too. Cold air hit my face, sharp enough to sting my nose and eyes. I stepped inside. The walk-in should have been the size of a closet. a box lined with shelves stuffed with boxes of frozen waffles, bulk sausage patties, pancake batter stacked in gray tubs. But the moment I crossed the threshold, the shadows stretched long and deep, swallowing the single flickering bulb overhead. My breath fogged out in front of me. Shelves receded into a dark that didn't feel like it ended where the wall should be. I counted tubs of batter by touch more than sight, fingers numbing fast. Then I heard it. A soft giggle, too small and too close. I froze, exhale curling out in little white ghosts. Something moved behind the stacked waffle boxes in the far corner. The giggle came again, higher this time, mixed with a wet sniffle like someone with a winter cold. A tiny hand, blue-white, skin raw and cracked, reached out, fingers curled around the metal shelf. Little Tommy Wells. I didn't know how I knew his name. Maybe the freezer told me. Maybe Granger's mumbling did when I wasn't listening close enough. Tommy's hand stretched for me, frost clinging to the sleeve of an old winter coat that looked too thin for any real cold. I stepped back, heels slipping a little on the frozen floor. His fingers brushed empty air, falling short by inches. "See you soon," he whispered. The sound came out like a sigh through cracked lips. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, nearly knocking a tub of sausage to the floor. The freezer light flickered once, enough to show a pale, round face just beyond the boxes. Wide eyes that didn't blink, skin frostbitten and shiny under the hum of the bulb. I backed toward the door, forcing my legs to move through the cold that seemed thicker than the air outside. When I hit the threshold, I raised my hand and knocked twice, harder than before. The door eased shut, sealing the hum and the whisper behind steel and frost. My breath burst out in a single sharp gasp. When I turned, Granger was there in the doorway, blocking the rest of the hall like a scarecrow that refused to blow away. He looked at my hands, saw them shaking, and nodded once, a small, grim approval. "You did it right," he rasped, his voice stripped raw. "You knock, he stays cold. Better than the last one." He didn't tell me what happened to the last one. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I just wiped the frost off my arms, picked up the clipboard he shoved at me, and marked the bacon stock low, because it always was. One more rule tested. One more door that stayed shut. For now. I used to think the worst sound in this place was the fryer popping when you forgot to change the oil. Or maybe the bell above the pass-through window when it rang at the wrong time of night. But by my 6th week behind that counter, I learned there were worse things to hear than grease and bells. Sometimes you hear your own manners trying to get you killed. That night, the rain came in sideways. Sheets of it slamming against the front windows so hard the neon sign looked like it was underwater. The parking lot was empty. Not even the truckers were dumb enough to pull off the highway with the storm screaming down like that. Mr. Granger sat in his usual booth, rule sheet tucked safe in his apron. He hadn't spoken since I clocked in, except to mutter something under his breath when he flicked his lighter open and shut. I didn't ask what he was saying. I didn't want to know. I wiped the counter, refilled the salt shakers, listened to the fryer hiss and spit. The warmth behind the griddle felt good against the damp that clung to my hair from the back alley where I'd tossed the garbage. At 2:47, the front door creaked open without the little bell jingling. That was wrong. The bell always rang when someone stepped in. Always. I looked up and wished I hadn't. He stood just inside the door, rain dripping off his shoulders in thin, steady streams that pooled on the tiles. He didn't look wet, not really, but the water kept falling anyway, like it bled out of him. His mouth stretched too wide, cracked at the corners like old leather split in the sun. His eyes looked like two empty plates, white and clean and hungry for something that wasn't on any menu I'd ever seen. He moved slow, no footsteps I could hear, just the hush of rain hitting the floor. And slid onto a counter stool. He didn't blink, didn't clear his throat or cough or nod or frown. He just watched me, mouth hanging open so wide I felt my own jaw ache. My tongue twitched. The words came up automatic, the way they drilled it into you in training. "Would you like coffee? Can I get you started with something?" My throat clenched around the question. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, copper, and sharp. My mouth wanted to ask anyway. Polite. Always polite. I looked down. My hands pressed flat against the countertop to keep them from shaking. A drop of water hit my knuckle, cold as the freezer. Another drop, and another. He hadn't moved, but the water kept falling like he'd dragged the storm inside with him. A soft rustle behind me, Granger. I felt him step up so close I could smell the stale ash and coffee sweat that never washed off his coat. He didn't say a word. He just slid between me and the hungry man, broad enough to block the stranger's blank stare. I heard the crack of his lighter, once, twice. The flame danced behind his shoulder. I focused on that tiny spark instead of the mouth at the counter. The air shifted, a hush that sucked the breath right out of the room. For half a heartbeat, I thought I'd feel cold fingers on my wrist again, or hear a whisper in my teeth like with Francine Moore. But there was nothing. Just the sound of water dripping onto the floor and Granger's boot tapping slow against the tile. Then, like a film skipping frames, the hungry man was gone. No footsteps out the door, no bell above the glass, just an empty stool with a wet circle where his rainwater pooled into the cushion. Granger flicked his lighter shut. "That one's always hardest," he said, voice scratchy but calm. He didn't look at me when he said it. "Everyone wants to be polite. That's how they slip inside. Polite'll get you dead faster than a dirty griddle." I didn't say anything. I just wiped the water off the counter. It soaked into my rag like it was thicker than rain. It smelled faintly of old leaves and wet basement carpet. I checked the clock. 3:02. My shift wasn't over yet. My rules weren't done testing me. Outside, the rain slammed against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists begging to come in. Inside, I kept my mouth shut and my eyes down. I was learning. I just hoped it was fast enough. By the time the clock crawled past 3 a.m., my legs ached and my brain felt like it had been dipped in fryer grease. The storm outside hadn't let up. Rain pounded the windows in sheets that turned the glass into a shifting funhouse mirror. I could almost see my reflection, eyes hollow under the buzz of the flickering neon sign. Mr. Granger sat slumped in his booth, smoke curling from the half-burnt cigarette dangling between his fingers. He hadn't said a word since the hungry man left, just stared at the back door like he was waiting for something worse to knock. I kept busy. That's what you do when the air feels too thick to breathe. You wipe the same countertop, you stack napkins that never stay neat, you hum a tune you don't even like to drown out the buzzing in your head. When the big brass wall clock above the register clicked over to 3:02, I felt it. That itch in my bones that said something was about to go wrong. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed the batter ladle and reached for the griddle out of pure habit. No thought, just muscle memory. I didn't hear Granger move until the ladle clattered out of my hand and hit the floor with a sharp metal crack. He'd slapped it right out of my grip, hard enough that my wrist stung where his palm caught bone. "Rule 5, he growled. His eyes were wide and glassy under the fluorescent lights, pupils small as pinpricks. "No pancakes after 3. Not unless you want to see your insides fried up with the eggs." My mouth opened to ask what that even meant, but I shut it fast when I saw his hands. They trembled just a little, enough to make the ashes from his cigarette drift down onto the counter like dirty snow. I bent to pick up the ladle, but the moment my fingers touched the cold metal, a sound echoed from the kitchen window. The brass bell, the one that hung above the pass-through for the cook to ding when orders were ready, gave one sharp chime. Then another. It shouldn't have rung. We were the only ones here. The fryers were off, the griddle was cold. But that bell rang anyway, clear and sharp through the thick fryer stink. I looked at Granger. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just flicked his lighter open once, the tiny flame fluttering before he snapped it shut again. "Answer it," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel and old cigarette smoke. "Answer it. Now." I wanted to run. My feet didn't move. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I forced my jaw to open, words scraping out like old nails dragged across a tile floor. "Order received, sir." The bell stopped. The silence that settled after felt worse than the chime, heavy and wet, pressing on my eardrums until they buzzed. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I'd done it right. Maybe I could breathe. But then the fryers behind me hissed, once, then again. A sharp pop, grease spitting out like tiny fireworks, made me flinch backward. The hiss rose into a whine, thin and sharp, twisting up through the vents. It didn't sound like oil anymore. It sounded like someone screaming, high and warbling, like a baby wailing in a burning house. I smelled bacon, but it was wrong. Too sweet, too thick, curling up my nose with the stink of burnt hair and something sour. The fryer popped again, grease bubbling over the edges in thin streams that splattered onto the floor, sizzling where they hit my shoes. Shapes rose out of the oil, tiny bubbles stretching like hands, thin fingers grasping at the air above the fryer. The screaming got louder, folding in on itself until it rattled my teeth. Granger's eyes snapped wide open. He grabbed my arm so hard I felt his nails dig through the fabric of my sleeve. "Run," he barked. His voice didn't sound tired this time. It sounded like it did that night at table 6, sharp enough to slice me free of my own frozen feet. I didn't argue. I didn't think about my purse under the register, or the cash drawer I'd promised to balance before the end of my shift. I just ran. We slammed through the swinging kitchen door, fryer screams chasing us down the hall. The back exit loomed, a battered metal push bar under a flickering exit sign that buzzed louder than the neon out front. Granger hit it first, shoving me through so hard the door frame rattled. The sound behind us cut off the second the door slammed. One moment the bacon screamed like a dying animal, the next it was just gone, swallowed by the cold slap of rain in the alleyway. I stumbled forward, knees hitting wet asphalt. Granger dropped to a crouch beside me, coughing hard enough that I thought his lungs might come up in the puddles pooling around our shoes. He reached out, his hand hovering over mine for a second before he patted it. Just once, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be gentle. "You did good, kid." He rasped between coughs. "Rules are all that keep us breathing." The rain poured down, cold enough to soak straight through my shirt and into my skin. I wanted to ask him what happened next. If we were safe now, if the screaming inside would stop tomorrow. But through the thin metal door behind us, I heard the sound I dreaded most, a soft, slow knock. Then another. 1, 2. I didn't turn to look. I didn't want to see what waited on the other side. All I knew was that tomorrow, I'd be back behind that counter. Because once you clock in at this place, you don't clock out. Not really. Not while there are still rules left to break. We stayed in the alley behind the IHOP until the rain soaked my bones so deep I felt hollow. Granger sat on an overturned milk crate, cigarette burning low between two trembling fingers. I huddled next to the dumpster, watching the steam rise off the cracked asphalt where the warm fryer grease from inside leaked under the back door. The knock I'd heard, that slow, dragging 1-2, never came again. But I felt it. Behind the thin metal, behind the freezer's hum that leaked through the walls. Like the building itself was breathing, waiting for me to step back in so it could swallow me piece by piece. I wanted to ask Granger if it was over. If maybe, just maybe, I could walk away now. Find another dead-end job somewhere the syrup didn't smell like rot. He must have seen it in my eyes because he laughed. A wet, rasping sound that turned into a cough so deep I thought it might pull his ribs inside out. "There's no quitting," he said when he caught his breath. "You think I never tried? I've packed my bag more times than I can count. Got as far as the Greyhound once. Sat in that busted vinyl seat, all the way to Knoxville." "You know what happened?" I shook my head. The rain ran down my collar, soaking the back of my shirt until I shivered. "The bus turned around," he said. His eyes looked glassy in the yellow light spilling from the flickering exit sign above the door. Driver didn't even blink. Took me right back here. Next thing I knew, I was pouring coffee for some drifter at table 2 like nothing happened. I wanted to say he was lying, that nobody was chained to a place like this. Not really. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, pressing down on my ribs just like Clara's icy fingers. "Why you?" I asked. My voice cracked on the last word. "Why me?" Granger pinched the cigarette out on the edge of the crate. He flicked the butt into the puddle at his feet. It hissed and floated there, spinning lazy circles. "This place feeds on folks like us," he said. "On folks who don't got anywhere better to run. Drifters, screw-ups, liars. It eats the parts of us we can't stand to keep. In return, we get to keep breathing, long as we mind the rules." He pulled the rule sheet from his apron pocket. Even in the rain it looked the same. Grease smudged, corners singed, the letters still black and crooked. He unfolded it slow, smoothing it against his knee. 7 rules, he said. 7 locks on a door that should never open. He looked at me like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Behind us, the metal back door rattled once. A soft creak, like someone pressed their palm against it from inside. Then the knock came again. One slow drag, then another. 1, 2. I wanted to ask what happened if the rules failed, if we messed up too many times, but I already knew. I'd seen it in the fryer oil that screamed like a dying baby, in the hungry man's mouth that could swallow me whole, in the freezer where little Tommy Wells giggled behind boxes of frozen batter that never thawed. I stood up. My knees cracked when I moved. Granger stayed seated, rule sheet clutched in his bony hands like it was the only thing holding him together. "You coming back tomorrow?" he asked. His voice was soft now, like he almost hoped I'd say no. I looked at the door. The flickering neon sign above the front windows buzzed through the rain, that same tired glow promising pancakes and coffee to anyone desperate enough to walk in after midnight. "Yeah," I said. My throat felt raw. "I'll be here." Granger nodded. He tucked the paper back into his pocket. He didn't smile, but his shoulders slumped like he was glad he wouldn't be the only one here when the knocks came again. The rain fell harder, washing stale fryer stink off the back steps for a few precious minutes. I wanted to believe the storm could wash me clean too, but the cold in my bones told me different. Tomorrow night, I'd tie my apron back on. I'd pour stale coffee for drunks and scrape burnt batter off the griddle. I'd watch the freezer door and listen for the bell and pray I never heard the bacon scream again. And when the knocks came, because they always did, I'd remember the rules. I just hoped they'd remember me too.